Hello, thanks for the warm welcome. So my name is Kuba Waliński. I'm going to talk mostly about Meteor, but I've been redoing my presentation a little bit. So I actually entitled it "The Mess We Made with JavaScript" and why I actually think Meteor might be the answer, or at least might be a step in the right direction. So a few words about me. This is how I look at the serious part of the internet. This is how I look at the less serious part of the internet. Any Futurama fans here? Yeah, cool. Okay, so Bender is my favorite character in Futurama. That's why I chose him for my avatar. You can email me. You can find me on Twitter. I obviously have a GitHub account and I blog a little bit. And so there are many options that you can contact me, and I encourage you to contact me because I value your feedback. I want to make sure that my talks are as good as they can get, and it's only with feedback that they'll get better. So please let me know if you liked the talk, like afterwards, if you didn't, and we'll try to make it better, even better next time. So I work at DEVit. That's like a huge multinational corporation, dealing with power and automation products, power transformers, robots, etc. And I'm building software that makes sure that actually all those things are running. And I'm also taking part in the organization of DEVit, which is a conference for developers in Krakow in Poland. And there will be a 5th edition this year in September. I invite you to have a look at our website at devdate.pl and have a look. Maybe you'll be willing to come. It's really worth it. Because A, we have very good speakers this year. B, Krakow is a lovely city, and you certainly won't regret it if you visit us. But on to the topic. The topic today is JavaScript. So before I start talking about Meteor, I wanted to have a brief history, at least my interpretation of JavaScript history, so that we're all on the same page. And because I think I want to give some background on the ideas that are behind Meteor, so that you can try to understand why Meteor is actually might be a good idea a good framework to use. So JavaScript, as you know, it was created 20 years ago over the course of 10 days, which is now legendary. But it's everybody basically laughs at the fact that it's a language that's been created in 10 days. But it's true, and that's why it has some problems, and those problems keep bothering us because we can't really change anything about JavaScript. So we still have some infant problems that came from the really early period. But we've managed to live with them, but maybe more on this later. So at the beginning in JavaScript infancy, it was a language that nobody really wanted to know too much about, just enough to make DHTML work. If you still remember what DHTML was, it was the fancy time when we discovered that JavaScript can be used to animate and do some crazy stuff to our websites. It was crazy times. But the problems with JavaScript at the very beginning was that actually manipulating the DOM was the worst part of JavaScript, and this is something that was the stuff of nightmares of web developers. Nobody really liked that. Douglas Crockford, who's one of the most proficient JavaScript guys out there, he actually had a talk with a title that I really like, which I quote here. It was really an inconvenient API, a pain to use, and it gave the whole language actually a bad name. So I encourage you to watch the talk, even though it's quite old. But Douglas also has some really good JavaScript series that he recorded while he was still at Yahoo, and you can see it on YouTube, so I highly recommend if you want to learn more about the history of JavaScript and get an in-depth look. And then the DOM problem was solved by jQuery. So jQuery was awesome. We knew CSS, so as far as you know CSS, you know how selectors work, you can now program in JavaScript. After some time, people actually thought that JavaScript equals jQuery because they didn't know that they can program in any other way. So that was actually another extreme. It didn't serve JavaScript very well because people, as I said, they stopped using JavaScript as such, and they did everything they could do with jQuery. Of course, today we already know that you might not need jQuery for everything, and the internet is quite slow, so I'll let this page load. But it's you might not need jQuery.com. It's an interesting website that you can have a look, and there are some code samples where you can see the code in jQuery, and you can see the equivalent code in vanilla JavaScript that you can use in all browsers, because JavaScript has features that are widely supported and that you can use instead of jQuery, and you don't have to, maybe you don't even have to add jQuery to your project, and you can keep it simpler. Okay, problem loading page. So you can trust me that there is such a website, and you can have a look at it later. If you look at my slides at home, the links would work. For those of you who are interested, just before the presentation I tweeted the link to my slides and the code, if you want to have a look later on. Yeah, so we discovered jQuery, everything was nice. People were really happy they didn't have to use the DOM anymore in the way that it was intended. And then in 2008, the Prophet Douglas came. Okay, now I really have no internet at all, which is a pain. So sorry, a short interruption to try to reconnect, because the presentation will be really better with some pictures. So let's see. Okay, maybe it will start working. In the meantime, I'll continue. So, in 2008, Douglas Crockford wrote a book, which is quite famous by now, JavaScript, the good parts. By the way, this is a comparison of the actual proportion of the good parts to the whole JavaScript, because the book at the bottom is JavaScript, the definitive guide. So just a little internal joke in the JavaScript community. It's not that bad, but it makes for a funny picture. Yeah, so Douglas Crockford was really into JavaScript at the time when nobody else was really interested in that language. So he kind of rediscovered it for all of us. He wrote the book, and it started, like, probably you could say, a renaissance of interest in JavaScript. And what happened next is really interesting, and what gets us to today, where at the moment JavaScript is the most popular programming language in the world, as measured, for example, by the number of GitHub repositories that come up every month. JavaScript has been the leader for, I think, a year or two in this category. So what happened after we discovered the good parts? We got Node.js, so we can use JavaScript on the front end and in the back end, which was a new thing, and at first it was just a novelty. So okay, so we can do that, but so what? But now with time, we came to realize that it's really powerful, especially Node, because it can be used in very performance-intensive environments, because it's quite fast. But there was also some cool things happening on the front end with JavaScript. A few frameworks that people started to use and they started to enjoy. One in particular that I like is Knockout.js. So promising beginnings for the new era of JavaScript, a simple framework that does a simple thing, but it does it good. In case of Knockout, it's data binding. It's really excellent at that. So if you haven't heard about it, if you haven't used it, I highly recommend. There have been also some other frameworks around that time, like Ember or Backbone, which you might have used. And yeah, but the world was a bit simpler, I think, at least as compared to what happened when Angular got popular. Right now, I believe Angular is a bit of an elephant in the JavaScript framework room, because it's massively popular. But also, it's going to be deprecated soon, the version 1, because last year they announced Angular 2, which is in no way backwards compatible with version 1. Once they release version 2, sometime this year, in the autumn probably, the Angular 1 will be supported for not more than 2 years after that, Google has said. And it's really a big problem because Angular got very popular in the enterprise world, and the average time of life for an enterprise application is much more than 2 or 3 years. So after about 2 years, if you have an application in Angular 1, suddenly there will be no developers that want to develop this application because Angular 1 will not be of interest to them. You will have a hard time finding developers. You will have a hard time fixing the bugs. There will be no option to update if some security vulnerabilities are discovered. So currently, that's why I think Angular is in a very bad place. And also, there are some other problems that people see with Angular. Rob Ashton is one guy, you might have heard. So he wrote this blog post that got really popular on Hacker News last year. You have ruined JavaScript. And he said that we had a good thing going with JavaScript. We were doing some nice things, simple things that were maintainable. And then you came with your Angular, with your provider factories and all that enterprise bullshit. And so that's one view. Maybe there's some truth to it. I myself also, I've been involved in an Angular project for the best part of last year, and it is somewhat true that the code gets really big, a bit complicated, hard to maintain if you really don't invest a lot of time in constant refactoring, making sure that the people who come after you can maintain it. So there's a lot of overhead when you use Angular. One more thing that you probably might have heard about Rob Ashton, which is a classic at this point. Microsoft, as you might know, has recently gone open source, and they've been open sourcing their tools. So let me see if I can enhance it a little bit. Yeah, so they open sourced MS-Build, which is the tool that you use to build stuff in the Microsoft world. And the first pull request was submitted by Rob Ashton, and he said, Microsoft Build has caused me years of pain, so replacing it with make is probably sensible. And the pull request was actually deleting all the MS-Build code and submitting the make code instead, which was a funny joke, I think, but some people didn't like that. And that led to the most hilarious comment I think I have ever read, and I learned that I think GitHub is not the right place for humor. So you better watch out if you want to have some humor on GitHub. It might not be a good idea. Yeah, it was basically a huge controversy, especially on Twitter. People went like crazy for 2 days that somebody could play a joke on Microsoft. Yeah, so Rob Ashton was actually a guest at Dev Day last year, and he dislikes Angular so much that, please note that the title of the talk was actually React plus NPM for great good, but the closing slide was friends don't let friends use Angular. So he's got a thing for Angular. He's pretty vocal about it. And I tend to agree with some of those points. But I don't think Angular is the biggest problem with JavaScript right now. Even bigger problem is the fact that actually JavaScript is becoming a victim of its own popularity, because you can say that now all hell broke loose because we've got framework on framework. Most of them are in beta, not really ready to use them. If you decide to use one of them, and 1 year later it turns out that it's no longer supported. React is the opposite case, fortunately, because it's backed by Facebook, so it's stable, they use it a lot, so it's actually maybe makes sense to invest in it. Angular 2, we still don't know how it's going to look like, because they're still working hard on it. Aurelia is an interesting addition. It's made by Rob Eisenberg, who's behind Durandal, which has been around for a while. It's quite stable and people like it. He actually worked with the Angular team for a few months, but then it turns out that they didn't really have the same opinions on how the framework should progress, so he left the Angular team and created his own framework. But those are just the 3 that I mentioned, but there are much more. So that's why people get frustrated and say that milk lasts longer than JavaScript framework. And sometimes it's hard not to agree. On the other hand, I also read a very interesting blog entry about the fact that, okay, so this guy, Judah Gabriel Himangu, he says, okay, so a new framework was released today, and I'm okay with that, because I like learning. That's actually, we're all knowledge workers, so we should strive to learn new things. And the more frameworks I know, at least I know how to get around, the more I earn, basically. That's his argument. So if you know a few, then you can distinguish yourself. So we shouldn't really be worried that much that there are so many frameworks and so much going on that we cannot keep up. Obviously, you don't have to learn every framework, but once you see that some serious players are starting using Angular or Aurelia or React, then you know it's probably a safe bet to invest your time and learn what's it all about, and is it worth your while or not. So another interesting thing that you can read around on the internet is the state of JavaScript in 2015 by Jimmy. So he does some mental exercise to try to figure out if this rate of adoption of frameworks in JavaScript, the rate of creating of new frameworks in JavaScript continues, how we might end up, because he believes that most developers are actually at the edge right now, and they can't take that anymore because it's too much to take in. So what he foresees is that in the near future we'll switch from actually using big frameworks that do everything for us into using a hand-picked collection of independent little libraries that you can combine on your own. And then if one of those libraries is not up to scratch, then you can easily replace it with something else. That seems like a reasonable approach. And I'm bringing this up actually because I would argue, and this is where I get to the actual topic of my presentation, I would argue that Meteor is quite good at that because it's actually underneath composed of small independent libraries, and it's not in reaction to this blog post because it's been around much longer than the time that has passed since this blog post was created. So actually the Meteor team, I think they analyzed and they came to the same conclusions that Jimmy, who wrote the post, that it's all good and well that we have so many options and everybody can choose a framework and everybody can even create his own framework. But at some point we need some sanity. And actually going with small independent components is probably one way to achieve this sanity. So Meteor, now a high-level overview, I would say it's basically a full stack framework, backend and frontend that you write in JavaScript. To me, although I have not much experience in Ruby on Rails, but from what I hear from the Ruby on Rails guys, it's more or less similar to Ruby on Rails in the fact that it's very developer-oriented, so it tries to make the developer's life as easy as possible. It wants to make sure that you can, with little effort, create a useful application in quite a short amount of time. And to me, as a JavaScript developer, obviously Meteor is better than Ruby on Rails, due to the fact mostly that you have one language on the front end and in the back end, whereas in Ruby you have Ruby in the back end and then JavaScript or CoffeeScript at the front end. And that seems like not a problem if you know Ruby and CoffeeScript, although I would argue that the actual mental tax that you have to pay when you switch from one language with its own type system, standard library, etc., when you switch from Ruby to something that you use on the front end, or basically from any backend language to a different front-end language, there's some tax that you have to pay. It takes some effort to do that. It's best if you don't have to do it. And here in Meteor you don't have to. You have JavaScript. You have the same data type everywhere. Obviously you have JSON everywhere, even in the database, because it uses MongoDB, which stores your JSON document directly. And due to all those features, I would argue that you can be super productive with Meteor. One thing that I would say is the most impressive feature of Meteor that makes it makes it stand out is the fact that it's reactive. I realize that reactive is a bit of an overloaded word currently, with the reactive manifesto, for example, but it's not that type of reactive. It's actually a different type. And to illustrate what I mean, I will now switch to demo mode. And I'll show you what I mean by reactive in my file system. Okay, if I can actually do that. Oh, come on. Okay, here we go. So, to my mind, reactivity is the fact that I have those two windows open, and I, for example, add a new file in here, and it will immediately appear in the second one. So it's really simple, but you must admit it's not something that we are used to on the web, at least not until very recently, where people started to pay attention to the fact that maybe your website should refresh itself automatically, so that the user doesn't have to keep pushing F5 to see if some new data came in. But in other languages, in other technologies, you have to actually pay a lot of attention to make sure that that happens, that the updates happen. Well, in Meteor, you get it out of the box. Meteor actually takes care of it for you. And I'll show you how. So, first we will start with the simple things. We'll create a new Meteor application from scratch. Meteor is you basically have a Meteor command in your command line that you use to interact with this environment. So I just type Meteor create new one, which is the name of my application, and it fetches the code from the internet. And in a moment, I have a new one folder created. I will now enter this folder. And it created for me 3 files, a CSS file, HTML file, and a JavaScript file. I'll first have a look at the CSS one, the HTML one. There's actually nothing in the CSS file, and it's not really that interesting. But what we have here is obviously Meteor uses some sort of a templating engine for HTML, and it's really simple. What we can see here is the inclusion of a template that's got a name hello, and the template is actually defined below. And this is the name that gets matched to this, so it knows to go to this template in that place. And inside this template, we have a variable that is a JavaScript variable that is referenced, and it will be printed in the actual resulting document. Onto the JavaScript that we get out of the box when we create a new Meteor application. What you have to know, the fundamental assumption for Meteor is that if you have some JavaScript code, it will run both on the server and on the client. So if you want to control what runs where, you can either do an if Meteor is client, and later on at the bottom, if Meteor is server. So this code will be only run on the server or on the client. You can also do it another way, which I'll show with another demo. But basically, what this simple application does, let's have a look. So we use the session store, I would say. You're all probably web developers, so you know what a session means. This is a special type of Meteor session that is reactive, and it means that whenever it changes, it will notify everybody that's dependent on it, that wants to know the value, and everybody being, for example, a template. Whenever the session changes, the template will automatically update. You will not have to write anything. And you bind the session to the template in here, because it creates a template helper for the hello template that you've seen before. And so we say that counter is actually a function that will return the current counter from the session. So with that code, What we also have here, which I didn't point out, we have also a button that will increment the counter whenever we click it, because we have an event handler here as well. On the hello template, when you click a button, we have a function that will increment the counter. So it's all pretty straightforward. Now I can go to the terminal. Okay. I can go to the terminal and run the application just by typing Meteor. And it will run on my local host by default at port 3000. So I will go to port 3000. And yeah, and this is my application. I actually have the console open because we'll be using it in a moment. But as you can see, I click the button, and every time I click I'll actually make it bigger so that you can see what's going on. So I can click the button every time I click it. Obviously, the template gets updated, even though I didn't write any specific code to say that when the button is clicked, you have to find a div with a certain ID and put the counter in there, right? I just done a binding inside the template. All the template knows is that it's supposed to render the counter in here, and all I have to do is to tell it where the counter is coming from in this line. So and the rest you get out of the box automatically. Everything happens as if it's some sort of magic, but it's no magic. It's just the template is subscribed to the session, and the session is telling the template every time, hey, you need to update because there's a new counter. What's interesting is that obviously when you have a complex application, there won't be only one button that can update some data. The data can change through many various inputs. But this is a JavaScript application, so we can just use the console and do some hacking. So I can just set the counter variable from the console. Say I'm going to set it to 13. I'm going to execute that. And you see that it's 13 now. And you can see here that it was actually executed. So it's a nice way of showing that whatever actually changes the session variable, it will be reflected everywhere, in every place that depends on it. Now, one thing that you need to know about a session, because this is a single page application, so when I'm going to press F5 now, I'm going to lose the session, because you're not supposed, obviously, to press F5 in a single page app. It will update itself and change the view that you see. When you press F5, it's as if you launch the application again from scratch. So that's why the session is cleared. So I'm going to click a few times now. So you see that the button is pressed four times. And I go to the code, and I'm going to demonstrate some cool feature of Meteor that is live reload. So say I'm going to change something in the template here. Instead of welcome to Meteor, I'm going to say welcome to Thessaloniki. I save that. Note that in my console it says client modified refreshing because it detected that there is a change in the code, and it actually should refresh already, but yeah, so it did. So it refreshed. So we have the new content on the website, but notice that even though it's required to reload the page, it still maintained the session. So the button is still pressed 4 times. So this is actually pretty cool, because Meteor, what it does under the hood is all the session state, the URL that the user is at, it will save that to local storage, right, just before reloading everything, when it got some new data from the server. It will take the new data from the server, process it, update basically the application, because you can also change the JavaScript, you can do anything. You can basically create a new application, and then when it's done processing all those changes, it will bring back the session and the URL and all the state from the local storage. What this actually means is when you update your application, you do not disrupt your users. Even if they are in the middle of something, they get the update, but the state is persistent. So deployments are becoming much more easy for you and less painful for your users, which I think is a win-win situation. So one thing to note is that all of those little libraries that are forming part of Meteor, they already know about all this reactive stuff, the session is reactive, that templates subscribe to it, etc. But what if you have some of your own code, or you use some, I don't know, jQuery plugin that you need to update or redraw something on the page every time something changes in your application. So that's not a problem at all. I'm going to demonstrate this with a simple, well, let's say an alert statement, which is obviously not reactive by its nature. So it doesn't know anything about Meteor, it's just a standard JavaScript construct. But I can make it reactive by creating what's called an autorun for any piece of code, actually. So I'm going to alert here what is the current value of the counter. Save that. Automatically refreshed. I already got the 4. When Meteor was restoring the state from local storage, the session got updated and already notified the code, and the alert was displayed. And every time I'm going to update it, I'll get an alert as well. But you might easily imagine that instead of this alert, you'll have some code that will, for example, I don't know, redraw something on the canvas or create a new graph on your website because some new data came in. So that's how you can plug into this reactive nature of Meteor. So I don't know if you would agree, but I think that's actually quite a lot of the cool features that you can see just by running the very, very simple application that you get out of the box when you create a Meteor app. But I'm going to go to a bit more complicated examples now. So I've quit that. I've created some sample code to show off to you. So I'm starting this DEVit application. It's refreshed here as well. So the premise is that this is supposed to be an application that allows me to take notes from this conference. So I have 3 notes that I've entered already. So I'll show you the code. And that's actually where I will discuss more how the Meteor applications are usually structured. In here, I'll just zoom that in so that you can see. So I have a few directories that have a special meaning in Meteor. Everything that's in the client directory will only be run on the client. Everything that's in the server directory will only be run in the server. And everything that's in the lib directory, you get a guarantee that it will be loaded before everything else. Because when Meteor runs, it takes all the JavaScript files from your folder and combines them into one. It takes all the HTML and combines it into one. And sometimes you obviously want to control the order, so this is how you can do that. So all the libraries that you use, you put in the lib folder, then you can be sure that they are available in your client and your server files, that all the stuff has already been loaded. But I said that Meteor combines the files for you. This effectively means that you are free to structure your application however you want, just to make sure that it's easy for you to maintain and that you know what's going on. And Meteor will make sense of all those files as long as you stick to those simple conventions. Okay, so what do we have here? First of all, we have a template. we have a template which is very simple, h1, and then an unordered list, and we have some a template that just iterates over nodes variable from JavaScript and outputs the text of each node, and that's how we can see all those three items. But where did those items come from? They actually come from a collection, and a collection is a basic data structure in Node that you can use, and it's mapped to Mongo, as you can see. As you create it on the MongoDB of your local MongoDB instance, you give it a name, and throughout your application, on the server, but as well on the client, you can access the collection by the nodes variable that I have here. So what actually happens on the server is, if there are no nodes in my collection, I insert those three that you have seen on the website. So that's why those three were immediately available when I loaded it. And on my body, that is the HTML body tag, I specify that it has a helper, and it says that nodes is actually just find from the nodes, and find in Mongo is just it returns all the elements that are in the collection. So that's why the template knew what nodes are. It knew that it's a collection, and it knew how to iterate over the collection and display all of them. And as you can see, all those items are just plain old JavaScript objects with a text property that is displayed. And what's interesting is that, as you can see, the helper, as you can see on the left, or you can't, but I'll zoom it in again. The helpers file is in the client, and I'm using the nodes collection because, as I said, the database collections are available on both sides of the application, because Meteor comes with a client-side implementation of Mongo that are automatically synchronized with your server-side implementation. So you've got the same collection on the server, the same collection with the client. You manipulate either one of those, the other one gets updated automatically. So this is very handy. Okay. So as I said, we have this collection on the client. There's no UI to modify it, but I'll once again use a console. So the collection is called nodes. So let me zoom that in. The collection is called nodes, and on that I can call insert, and I pass in the new JavaScript object with some new text. So let's say the Meteor is cool. I zoom out, and you see that it's been added. It's been added to my local client-side Mongo. When it appeared in the client-side Mongo, the template took note that there is a new item, rendered it, and then it's also been synchronized to the backend. So as I said, it's cool that the database is constantly in sync and you don't have to care about it. However, as you think about it a bit more, you might come to the conclusion that A, it's terribly insecure, because if you have all your database on the client, everyone who presses F12 can access it, even though you don't display it. But obviously if it's there in JavaScript, you can manipulate it, so not cool. And B, it's also terribly inefficient. If you have a huge database and you're going to download the whole database to the client, it's also not going to be a good idea. So that's why we've got two ideas in Meteor that try to conquer those problems. What happens actually, I don't have to terminate that. I'll just open the new terminal and try to describe what's going on. So when you start a new application in Meteor, by default, you have a very relaxed security and efficiency settings so that you can easily develop. And one of those features is that you have a package that's installed in each new Meteor app that is called auto-publish. And if I remove that package, which you should do if you're planning to release your application to the world, so we remove the auto-publish package. Okay, so issues again. We'll see. So I removed that. Okay, I didn't start Meteor, sorry. Yeah, so you can see suddenly no items, because what happened by default was all the data was published and automatically transferred to the client. But now I removed the auto-publish plugin, and there's currently no data. And now I have to specifically say what data am I going to publish. So on the server, I need to say I'm publishing the nodes collection, all of it. But you might as well enter here some criteria that you only publish the data for the current user, or you only publish the data that's in a certain state based on the data that you have. For example, if you have blog posts, you can only publish those that are finished, not those that are in draft mode, obviously. So that's what you have to do on the server. On the client, you have to subscribe to a publication, and you match the name nodes. So I use the name nodes everywhere. So now when I save that, you can see that our items are back, but we have very tight control over what actually gets transferred to the client. What the problem we still have is that if I were to enter, once again, that Meteor is full, I can still do that, even though I might not be a registered user, but I have access to the nodes collection, so it's insecure. And it's insecure because there's also a package that's called insecure, which is included by default. And I removed that package as well to make my application more secure and make sure that I actually have to think about who I want to allow to modify the database on the client. So now if I run nodes insert, actually it doesn't add any new items, because you see I get a message that access is denied to insert anything on the database from the client side. And if I want to allow that, I have here a permissions file, but I have to specifically say when an insert is allowed. Here I get the ID of the user who wants to do the change, and I get the actual document. So what I can do is I can say that if the text is I like Meteor, it will just allow to add it. If it's something else, then it won't. Just an example. So that's how you can control that. Now let's see. Another cool thing you can do with Meteor is you can deploy your application really easily. Meteor actually makes available to you the domain name meteor.com, and you can select any subdomain that's unused and claim it. So I'm going to try to claim DEVit, and I'm going to try to deploy this application to devit.meteor.com. It will take a while, but it seems to be available because it's minifying, building, and it will upload it in a moment, and we'll see that it works. But in the meantime, I'll show you one more thing that I think is really cool in Meteor, and it's called latency compensation. In a few short words, it means that because we have the code that runs on the client and on the server, we do some update to the database, we can run the code on the client and with a high degree of certainty know what the server is going to return. So what Meteor does, it runs the code on the client, updates the UI, and So for the user it's instantaneous. Then if it happens that it took actually longer, well, after a while if the server comes and says that the result was different, it will be updated on the client. It's a bit complicated, but let me just show you. Show you the code first for latency compensation. So we have a method that adds a node, and if it's on the server, it appends the server to the text. If it's on the client, it appends the client to the text. But the server waits for 3 seconds before doing this change. So I'm going to call this method now from the developer console. I'm just going to tell that the text is test. So you can see, test client, after 3 seconds, the server actually said that it's going to have a different name. But what's important is the user didn't wait. Even if something goes wrong around on the server, it sees some result, it knows that the application is running, and the user can continue working. And in the meantime, the application was deployed. So now we'll just check if it's actually there. DEVit.meteor.com. Yeah, my notes from DEVit, and you see after a while it loaded the content from the server. So it's deployed and it's available, so when you're working on an app, you can just show it off to your friends, show it to your client, without having to buy any server space, rent any servers, virtual machines, etc. It's all taken care of. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. So I'm going to go back to the presentation and finish with the 7 Meteor principles that make it stand out, I think. Data on the wire, so you don't send HTML, you don't have REST APIs. You send it over WebSockets. The communication is really fast. You have one language, as I said, JavaScript on both ends. You have the database everywhere, it's automatically kept in sync for you, so that you don't have to worry about that. You have latency compensation that I just demonstrated, so you immediately execute the action on the client, and then try to reconcile if there are any differences when it will run on the server. And you have this reactivity. The database is reactive, the template is reactive, so they all know, they keep each other in sync, they let each other know when something changes, and everything in your application updates. Meteor is embracing the ecosystem. It's open source and it uses open source libraries extensively. And one of the most important features, I would say, is that it's really simple once you have a look at it. And it's really easy to use, and as I said, developer friendly. So some resources here. Here's where you can find the code and the slides from this presentation. And one thing that I really recommend that you have a look is the meteor.com/install. This is some information how you install it on OS X or Linux. You do it in a command line. You have an installer for Windows, but then after you install it, you have a 12-step tutorial that you can go through in about an hour and learn a lot about Meteor and try to figure out if it's something that's of interest to you. So I would really encourage all of you, if you're interested in what you saw, to give it a try and see if it will fit with your development practices. So, yeah, so that's it. Thanks for your attention, and I'll be open for questions and also waiting for feedback. Thank you very much.
Okay, please.